Hey guys, tonight we're sliding quietly into the dim, suspicious glow of a Roman banquet hall, somewhere on the cliffs of Capri, where the torches flicker with just enough enthusiasm to light the paranoia in everyone's eyes. You're not here for glory, or even good food, really. You've been invited by Emperor Tiberius himself, and that means something between an honor and a silent threat. The first thing that hits you is the smell-sour wine, goat's milk that may or may not be fresh, and something vaguely resembling seawater-soaked bread. The marble beneath your sandals is cold and slick, like it's always been slightly damp. Velvet curtains hang from the walls, thick, red, and motionless, except for when they aren't. Sometimes they breathe. Or maybe that's your imagination, whispering something sinister. You probably won't survive this dot, so before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. I always love to know where these late night journeys are finding you. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step forward, unsure whether your presence is expected or merely tolerated. Tiberius is already seated at the far end of the long, narrow table flanked by statues that look a little too human and advisors who look a little too pale. His robe is a shade of purple, so rich it might actually insult your simpler tunic just by existing. There are cushions everywhere, soft, stuffed, but never quite comfortable. You're directed to one with a polite, skeletal gesture from a servant who hasn't blinked in what you can only assume is the last century. "Welcome," says a voice from the shadows. It could be the Emperor or the curtain. You nod, not speaking. That's a wise choice. Even the spoons here seem to be listening. Platters begin to arrive, slowly, as if they too are unsure whether this is a meal or a trap. The first is a lukewarm collection of olives and something that might once have been cheese. The second is more concerning, a jellied mixture of chopped eggs and vinegar. You try not to flinch. Tiberius is watching. One historical record notes that Tiberius preferred his gatherings to begin slowly, like an animal stalking prey. You get the sense he enjoyed watching people sweat. Those scholars still argue whether this was from sadism or simply boredom. The conversations are soft, muted. Nobody wants to say the wrong thing, which, of course, means nobody says anything. The silence sits beside you like a sixth course. You glance down the table: senators, poets, a military general who may or may not still be alive. His eye twitches, but that could be muscle memory. You take another sip of your wine. It's sour, yes, but also oddly metallic. You tell yourself that's normal. That's how Roman wine is supposed to taste. But also, you start to question your life choices. Tiberius finally raises a hand. Everyone freezes. Then, with a gesture more suited to a man about to feed a pet lion, he flicks a fig into his mouth. The crunch sounds too loud. Maybe it wasn't a fig. Maybe it was something with legs. There's a small dog under the table, you think. Or perhaps it's just a shadow. It moves strangely. It might even speak, if you listen long enough. You breathe in, slowly, carefully. Your cushion squeaks, betraying you. The senator to your right raises an eyebrow. Or maybe it's a scar. Everything here is a maybe. The torches hiss softly. The shadows lean closer. And you, honored guest that you are, continue to sit, smile, and swallow your uncertainty with a mouthful of questionable egg jelly. It's going to be a long, long evening. The olives did nothing to prepare you for this next round. A platter of lukewarm quail eggs in sour wine reduction, presented with all the enthusiasm of a condemned man's final meal. No garnish, no explanation, just there, sitting in front of you, daring you. You poke at them with a two-pronged fork, which immediately feels like the wrong choice. A servant silently replaces it with a small spoon made of bone. Very subtle. You nod in false gratitude, because here, gratitude is just good sense. The man who brought it doesn't leave. He stands directly behind you, breathing like someone who's never been taught how dot from across the table. Tiberius munches slowly, chews thoughtfully, then stops, not blinking, and watches as a senator drops his fig. The fig rolls. It stops. Under the table, nobody moves. The senator tries to chuckle. Nobody laughs. The fig is not retrieved. The emperor shifts. The cushion sighs beneath him. He grunts something in Latin, something archaic and probably unrepeatable, and the next dish appears, carried with ceremony, but placed with complete disinterest. A plate of pickled fish, laid on a smear of what you can only describe as sad. Sauce. You stare at it. It stares back. One contemporary account suggests that Tiberius rarely ate in front of crowds, preferring private meals with a few favorites, where he could chew and intimidate in equal measure. But this evening seems to be an exception, or a performance. Historians still argue whether these public feasts were about politics or theater. Possibly both, or neither. The wine is back, topped off constantly, never requested. It tastes slightly different each time. Not better, just different. You've stopped trying to understand. You sip, you swallow, you survive. A scribe stands in the corner, scratching something onto a scroll. You briefly wonder if he's documenting the menu or keeping track of everyone's expressions. Maybe both. You adjust your face accordingly, just enough appreciation, not too much enthusiasm. You've seen what happens to enthusiastic people in Roman politics. They disappear. Or worse, they get reassigned to Judea. More dishes arrive. A cold salad of lentils and what may be seaweed. Boiled turnips, sliced with a precision that implies someone out there takes turnips very seriously. And a tray of what appears to be roasted mouse small, crisp, with tiny toothpicks already. Inserted for your convenience. You pause. You blink. You nod once and move on. The wine stares at you now. Meanwhile, conversation limps along. One poet recites a line from Ovid, poorly. Tiberius snorts. Not quite a laugh, not quite a growl. The room tenses. Another senator quickly praises the flavor of the eel dish, which nobody else has received yet. Everyone nods supportively anyway. The eel arrives minutes later. Poached, soft, pale as wax. Served with something green and trembling. You think it might be aspic. You think it might be watching you. No one eats first. You wait. You all wait. Finally, the emperor lifts his spoon. You follow. You take the bite. You swallow. You lie to yourself. Tiberius tilts his head ever so slightly and fixes you with a gaze that can only be described as humid. His lips twitch upward, barely. Perhaps that's approval. Perhaps indigestion. Either way, you've passed some invisible test. Your stomach disagrees. Loudly. The floor beneath your cushion feels colder now. The wine glass seems heavier. A flute plays somewhere near the columns, gently off-key. A dancer stretches her arms toward the ceiling with the dramatic energy of someone 2 rehearsals away from quitting. No one watches. Everyone watches at the edge of the table. Someone's goblet spills slightly. A servant appears instantly, wiping the wine with something that looks a lot like someone's retirement toga. The senator doesn't apologize. The servant doesn't expect it. The silence is restored like an overworked marble restoration crew. You try a slice of smoked radish, which is just as unpleasant as it sounds. But the texture surprises you soft, almost fluffy. You begin to suspect this is not, in fact, radish. You stop mid-bite. You cough politely. Nobody reacts. The feast plods forward. You're no longer sure how long you've been here. Hours, maybe. Days. Time moves differently under torchlight and scrutiny. The platters keep coming, each one more mysterious than the last. At one point, you're fairly certain a pastry was shaped like the emperor's head. You don't ask questions. Your head feels light. The wine is working, or the candles, or the eel. You lean back slightly. Tiberius is whispering now, to no one in particular, or maybe to the shadows, or to himself. It's not your concern. Not tonight. Just then, a small bowl of what might be plums lands in front of you. They glisten with honey and vinegar. You stab one. It leaks. You pretend it didn't. You eat it. Everything tastes like secrecy. Somewhere, deep in the corner of your peripheral vision, a mosaic of Neptune seems to shift. Or maybe that's your third glass of, what even is this wine? Either way, you blink too many times and hope nobody notices. There are murmurs now barely audible. A senator is discussing taxation, or grain storage, or maybe nothing at all. His words flow like molasses poured over a dying campfire. You've officially entered the zone of mild discomfort, where nothing is especially wrong, but nothing is quite right either. This is the appetizer phase of uncertainty, the stomach churning, prelude to the main course of psychological endurance. And still Tiberius smiles, or pretends to. There's no formal signal when the banquet turns from performance to interrogation, but you feel it nonetheless. The energy in the room dips not just in volume, but in temperature. A chill enters through some unseen door, or maybe it leaks. From the emperor's smile, Tiberius speaks. Finally, his voice is low, grainy, like wet parchment being torn in half. You don't catch the Latin. No one does, not really. But you all nod. Everyone nods. Then, a name, spoken clearly. A young man 3 seats down stiffens. His cup shakes slightly. He was a minor noble from the provinces, you think. Or maybe the son of someone who displeased someone. The emperor gestures again. A dish arrives. Special. Just for him. It's a fish. A whole one, still staring. Stuffed with what appears to be smaller fish, which in turn are stuffed with what might be pine, nuts, and shame. The noble smiles with the expression of someone clinging to life with their teeth. He eats, slowly. The rest of you pretend not to notice. This is the power of the Roman. Banquet under Tiberius. Equal parts cuisine and chess match. Each bite is a statement. Each course a test. Meanwhile, the music limps along a flute, a lyre. The occasional offbeat hand clap from a musician who seems to have drifted into a personal dreamscape. The shadows lean longer. The food tastes less like food and more like suggestion. You're presented with a roasted artichoke, charred slightly, topped with crushed figs and anchovy paste. A delicacy, allegedly. You peel back a leaf. It steams. It weeps. You eat it, because not eating is a political act. In this room, even digestion is diplomacy. More wine. Of course. This one is redder, thicker. You wonder if someone strained it through an old senator's resume. You sip. You breathe. You try not to tremble. Everyone is watching everyone else and pretending they aren't. Tiberius leans in. He speaks again this time, louder, clearer. A joke, perhaps. Something about Neptune, or marriage, or goats. Laughter follows, obedient and hollow. You join in, half a second too late. His eyes find yours. You smile. He doesn't. A poet tries to change the subject. He recites a short verse, improvised, something about olives and the moon. It's dreadful. Nobody says so. But Tiberius nods, which means it was either inspired or convenient. Either way, the poet survives another course. Your cushion no longer. Squeaks. Maybe it learned. Maybe it's gone. Now the centerpiece arrives. A great silver platter, steaming, heralded like a conquering general. Upon it, a boar's head, its mouth stuffed with dates, its eyes replaced with something glimmering. Not jewels, not quite. You think they're candied grapes. But you know better than to ask. Everyone is served. Tiny slices, each with a drizzle of some sauce made from honey and fermented fish guts. A Roman delicacy. You eat it. It tastes like history and regret. You smile again. From the far end of the room, you hear the beginnings of a fight. Two senators whispering too loudly, arguing over land, or rights, or something petty. One raises his voice. Tiberius doesn't look up. He snaps his fingers. A guard appears. The senators stop. Silence returns. You've now been here long enough that your senses have started to betray you. You hear your own heartbeat in the goblet. You think the curtains are breathing again. You swear the dog or the shadow has moved closer. Dessert arrives. Eventually. It's a strange bowl of barley, honey cakes, and something that looks like snow. You're told it's mountain ice, flavored with rosewater. It melts before you can decide whether that's impressive or terrifying. You eat it. It's cold. It's sweet. It reminds you that you're still alive. Tiberius rises, slowly. The room stills. A gesture, a nod, a grunt. The feast is over. Or paused, or merely shifting into some new, less edible phase. You stand, or try to. Your legs resist, your mind does not. A servant offers a hand, and for a moment, you wonder if it's a trick. You take it anyway. The Emperor exits, flanked by guards and ghosts. The room exhales. Barely. You survived the banquet. You did not thrive, but you endured. And in Tiberian Rome, endurance is its own quiet triumph. As you shuffle toward the exit, one final dish is offered. A fig, perfectly ripe, balanced delicately, on a silver plate. You hesitate. Then, without a word, you decline. Tonight, that may have been your smartest decision. The palace corridors stretch ahead of you like an unspooling dream, walls flickering with torchlight, shadows swirling like gossip. You move slowly now, not from caution, but digestion. Behind you, the banquet hall remains a muffled heartbeat of clinking goblets, low murmurs, and the occasional muffled belch of a senator too confident in his constitution. You're not exactly dismissed. You're simply not summoned to stay. In Tiberius's Rome, that counts as a blessing. Tonight's feast may be over, but not the spectacle. You find yourself shepherded gently, but unmistakably toward another chamber, smaller, stranger, dimmer, not quite a room, more like an exhibit, or a stage. A servant gestures with 2 fingers. Enter. You do. Inside, low cushions form a ring around a curious centerpiece, a wide marble basin filled with warm milk and floating flower petals. Perfumed steam rises into the gloom. There are people here, half-draped in silk, lounging with the ease of those who've seen things they'd rather forget. This, you learn, is the digestio. The digestion phase, a post-feast ritual meant to settle the stomach and uncoil the mind. Here, talk softens. Debate dissolves. Eyes glaze. Someone passes you a small wooden board. Atop it, glass beads and tiny carved figurines, a game of strategy. Something like tabula or latrun. You don't recognize the rules, and neither does your opponent. That doesn't matter. You play anyway, slowly, aimlessly, like people pretending life has no stakes. Next to you, a philosopher dozes mid-sentence. His scroll flutters to the floor, unread and unmissed. Across from you, a dancer from Anatolia plucks at a psaltery. Fingers languid, expression detached. You suspect she's been here longer than any of you, trapped in this gilded after-party since sunrise the day before. This is the other side of Roman indulgence. Not just conquest by food, but surrender by mood. You recline. You sip something. Herbal. It might be wine. It might be medicine. It might be both. It's hard to tell anymore. On the far wall, a fresco catches your eye. A mythological scene, perhaps Hercules defeating the Hydra. Or maybe it's just a drunk senator fighting a decorative fountain. Artistic license abounds. You blink. The mural wavers. You blink again. It doesn't help. One man begins reciting Virgil, or pretending to. He pauses halfway through a line, replaced by a woman humming tunelessly into a cup. No one stops her. No one cares. Sound here has lost its sequence dot, and yet, beneath it all, the tension remains, like a string stretched just past its breaking point. You feel it in the way people avoid certain topics, certain names. In the way one guest keeps glancing at the door, waiting for someone who probably won't arrive. Or maybe dreading someone who might. You consider escape. Briefly. It's always a fantasy in Rome, especially when you're still digesting a boar's face and 3 conflicting fish species. Instead, you lay back. Your cushion exhales under you, betraying your presence with a traitorous hiss. A few heads turn. A few smiles flicker sympathy, amusement, relief that it wasn't them. You attempt conversation with a man whose breath smells like cloves, and regret. He insists Tiberius once tried to outlaw clouds for making Rome look moody. You nod. You don't believe him, but you want to. Nearby, someone starts to dance, not for applause, but out of necessity. A slow, almost sleepwalking swirl of fabric and limbs. Like a ghost rehearsing a memory. You watch, entranced. Or maybe sedated. The milk basin bubbles once. No one reacts. You decide not to ask. A serving girl refills your cup with something warm, spiced, and faintly alarming. She whispers something as she pours. You don't understand the words, but the tone's unmistakable. Stay soft, stay slow, stay quiet. You oblige. For a moment, you float suspended in this curiously weightless space between food and fear. Past. And sleep. You're not quite you anymore. You're something ancient, fermented, like wine left out in the sun too long. And in Rome, that counts as flavor dot from somewhere behind a curtain. Laughter erupts. Then silence. Then a sneeze. Then silence again. Someone begins telling a story about a senator who exploded from overeating garum. You listen. You believe it. Not because it's likely, but because it's Rome. And in Rome, likelihood is a poor substitute for drama. You wonder, briefly, what time it is, whether it's still night, whether it matters. Probably not. The clocks here are opinion-based eventually. The cushions start emptying. One by one, guests drift out, melt into corridors, vanish into sleep or schemes. Guard enters, yawns theatrically, and begins stacking goblets into a pyramid. You take the hint. You rise. Slowly. Everything inside you sloshes as you pass the milk basin. A single petal clings to your sandal. You shake it off. It doesn't move. You give up. It rides with you. Outside, the air feels different. Crisp, real. A reminder that the palace is not the world, just its most convincing illusion. Still, you survived another Roman night. And that, in Tiberius's Rome, makes you downright heroic. You wake to a shaft of pale sunlight slanting across your face, though you're fairly sure you didn't fall asleep. You're in a room not your own, though it's luxurious enough to borrow without gilt marble floors, imported tapestries, and a faint, musky scent of aged wine and lavender oil. A servant stands silently near the door, holding a fresh tunic and a wet cloth. You blink once. He bows. Apparently, it's morning. Or what counts as morning here? You've survived the feast, the digestio, and possibly even a mild poisoning. Congratulations, but don't get too comfortable. Today, you're expected at a private event even more exclusive than dinner. The post-feast symposium, a gathering where ideas are passed around like olives, and nobody quite agrees whether anything actually happened. You're guided through a series of courtyards where birdsong tries and fails to drown out the clatter of marble sandals and political tension. At the end of one long hallway sits a door carved with the image of Janus, the two-faced god. Subtle. You push it open. Inside, the room is dim and round, with couches arranged in a lazy spiral. It smells faintly of ink and smugness. The attendees are mostly senators and scholars, men whose eyebrows arch on instinct and whose voices never drop below a dramatic whisper. There are no instruments, no dancers, just scrolls, cups, and egos. A slave passes you a diluted cup of wine. Not too strong. This isn't for fun. This is for opinions. A man in a rust-colored toga clears his throat, the universal signal that someone is about to say something regrettable. The problem, he announces, with Greek education is that it teaches too much poetry and not enough discipline. Someone scoffs. Someone else chokes on a date bit, whether from laughter or disbelief, it's unclear. And just like that, the game begins. Welcome to the Roman morning salon, part philosophy, part performance art, part therapy for people too wealthy to be alone with their thoughts. You take your place on the cushions, nod sagely, and pretend to understand a discussion on stoicism that seems to involve more shouting than serenity. One senator launches into a tirade about how Tiberius personally banned a certain type of bean because it made his dreams too vivid. Another insists that's a misinterpretation of Pliny. A third quotes Pliny incorrectly to prove both of them wrong. You sip your wine and try not to exist. Then, a younger man barely out of his second chin leans toward you conspiratorially. You know, he whispers, Tiberius once sentenced a man to exile for complimenting the wrong statue. You blink. He nods pleased, said it showed disloyalty to marble priorities. You want to laugh. But this is Rome, and here, absurdity is a legal category. Still, there's something almost soothing about the cadence of it all. These verbal duels, this ritualized bickering, it's like watching gladiators who've traded swords for metaphors. The goal isn't clarity, it's dominance. And preferably, a few memorable quips to retell at the next BATHHOUSE dot. But every so often, someone says something genuinely profound. The empire, an older scholar mutters, is a stomach with no mouth. The room goes still. Then, a burst of laughter. Relief. No one wants to take that too seriously. You're handed a scroll, expected to read aloud. You squint. It's in Greek. Of course. You stumble through a few lines of Hesiod, your accent causing. One man to visibly age. He clutches his chest as if you've personally offended Homer. You apologize. He waves you off, magnanimous in his superiority. Still, there's an unspoken bond forming here, like people shipwrecked on a very plush island. These men, for all their bluster, know the truth. That Rome, for all its marble and might, is fragile. That emperors rise, fall, and sometimes disappear entirely. That one wrong word can unmake you. That wine makes that truth easier to ignore. A servant enters with a tray of dried fruit and smoked eel. The conversation lurches sideways into culinary metaphors. Someone argues that eating olives with honey is a metaphor for Roman politics. No one disagrees strongly enough to stop him. Then a new voice joins the room, gravelly, unmistakable. Freeze.Tiberius. Or rather, his voice. He doesn't enter. He sends a sealed letter, read aloud by a steward with the reverence of someone reciting divine scripture. It's a reflection, part decree, part poem, part warning. Something about balance, about ambition, about not trusting those who smile too often. When it ends, Silence reigns. No one dares interpret. The letter is folded, sealed again, and placed on a pedestal like a holy relic. You glance around. Eyes shift nervously. Some nod, some look at their feet. One man mutters a short prayer to no god in particular. Another adjusts his toga-like armor. Then the games resume. Not board games this time, but something older, more dangerous. Gossip dots softly, cautiously. The air thickens with names, senators, generals, poets. Who's in favor? Who's vanished? Who's reappeared with fewer teeth? The Romans are masters of implication. They never accuse. They suggest. They smirk. And through it all, you sit. A listener. A watcher. Part of it now. Eventually, the conversation drifts to dreams. One man insists he dreamt of Jupiter himself, offering him a fig. Another claims Venus visits him nightly, disguised as a tortoise. The dreams spiral into visions, into omens, into excuses for past decisions. Historians still argue whether these salons served any true political purpose or were simply therapy for the elite. The line is thin, blurred by time, wine, and the need to believe your words matter. A bell rings. The session ends. Cups are drained. Scrolls are rolled. Sandals slide back into corridors. You rise lighter in body, but heavier in mind. Outside, the sun is blinding. The noise of real Rome assaults your ears, vendors shouting, horses braying, children laughing too loudly for comfort. You survived another layer of the Roman onion, peeling slowly, and you suspect the core is still a long way. Down, the air thickens as the sun ascends, casting long, judgmental shadows across the Via Sacra. You walk with cautious steps, because in Rome, movement is never just about going somewhere. It's about who sees you, who doesn't, and who pretends not to. And today, your destination is a peculiar one, an imperial food tasting dot. Yes, you heard that right. You've been invited, now that verb might be generous, to observe the daily ordeal of the pregustadores, the imperial food tasters whose job is both incredibly important and phenomenally underpaid. You're not exactly thrilled. But let's be honest, anything sounds better than another. 2 hours of forced philosophy. From senators who haven't touched a shovel in their lives, you're escorted to a modest courtyard, shadowed by cypress trees and echoing with the distant trickle of a marble fountain. A long table sits in the center, arranged with more symmetry than joy. Jugs of wine, baskets of figs, plates of pickled dormice, all painstakingly laid out. Nothing yet touched. It's beautiful in a morbid way, like a crime scene before the crime. One by one, the food tasters arrive. There are 4 today. They look alert, if mildly resigned. One tightens his belt a notch too far. Another cracks his knuckles like a man, about to arm wrestle fate. You're told they're rotated frequently to avoid emotional attachment to outcomes. A steward, narrow-faced, scroll in hand reads a short statement declaring that the meal has been prepared according to protocol, that each ingredient has been inspected by 3 separate officials, and that any outcomes are not the fault of the Emperor. And then, solemn as priests, the tasters begin. First, the wine. Each sips a mouthful, swishes it like philosophers pondering metaphysics, and swallows. Then they wait. Everyone waits. Nothing. Then the cheese soft, white, suspiciously scented. A longer pause. One man sniffs. Another clears his throat. The tension could cut marble. Still, no collapses. On it goes smoked fish, boiled beets, a surprisingly modern-looking roast chicken. You find yourself genuinely nervous for these men, whose entire digestive tract is on the front line of imperial. Paranoia. One taster comments that the honey dates taste funny. Everyone freezes. What kind of funny? Someone asks, like, prophetic. He mutters. No one knows what that means. They move on, Historians still argue whether food tasters in Tiberius's court were a functional part of palace life, or simply a performative gesture meant to remind everyone that death could arrive via plum. The truth likely hovers between theater and necessity. Tiberius, after all, had enemies, not just the obvious ones with knives, but subtler threats hiding behind apricots and oyster sauce. You're offered a piece of bread. You decline the tastings. Continue, now with syrups and rare nuts from Britannia. A man chews slowly, closes his eyes, and then abruptly sneezes. The entire courtyard lurches backward. He smiles sheepishly. Allergies. He says a collective exhale as the final course is sampled goose liver, served with a fig reduction that smells like ambition. The steward checks each taster's pulse, records their facial color, and has them recite a line from Virgil, just in case any early signs of hallucination or slurred speech can be caught before the emperor risks so much as a bite. You look around. No guards, no dogs, just precision, control. Fear dressed in velvet. This is what luxury looks like when you peel back the curtain. Not joy, not abundance, but suspicion carefully plated. You're invited to inspect the kitchen. Why not? You follow a corridor that smells of garlic and scorched flour. Inside, a dozen cooks move in choreographed chaos, each one focused like their lives depend on it, which they do. One man stirs a pot while muttering prayers. Another sharpens a knife, as if convincing it to behave. At the center stands the head chef, a woman, surprisingly. She's older, hair wrapped tightly, eyes sharp enough to flay. She doesn't look up when you enter. You ask her what it's like cooking for a man like Tiberius. She shrugs. You ever tried roasting a fish that hates you? You blink. She waves, her ladle like a wand, and returns to layering a dish with tiny, immaculate rose petals. There's a myth she shares as she works, about a cook in the early days of Tiberius's reign who forgot to peel an onion properly. The emperor's cousin choked. The cook was exiled to a small island, not for the death, but for the imperfection. You ask if the story is true. She smiles. All Roman kitchen stories are true, she says. Whether they happened or not, the way she says it sends a chill through you. As you exit the kitchen, you're hit by the scent of something burning. It's just a crust of bread, left too long. But for a moment, your heart rate spikes. Because here, even a singed crust could imply conspiracy. You return to the courtyard. The tasters are still upright. One is singing, possibly a good sign. Tiberius never appears. He rarely does. Meals are often served to empty thrones, his presence implied, his taste confirmed by absence. It's both ritual and riddle. Back outside, Rome bustles as usual. Market stalls, barking dogs, a child rolling a hoop past a man vomiting quietly into a sewer. You pause to consider what you've just witnessed. Not just the logistics of survival, but the psychology. How a man like Tiberius eats not for nourishment, but for negotiation. With fate, with enemies, with the idea that trust might be less deadly than doubt. It's exhausting, being emperor. But it's more exhausting being the man who prepares his pickled mushrooms. You wake mentally, at least, to the familiar scent of olive oil and damp limestone. The clamor of morning Rome is beginning to swell again. And today's trudge? A feast. Or, to be precise, the memory of one. You're off to the records room. That fusty, scroll-packed tomb where Rome keeps detailed notes of every imperial expense, including banquet menus, guest lists, and the occasional personal insult scratched in the margins. Why? Because today you're researching the most absurd, the most utterly forgettable feast of Emperor Tiberius. And that's saying something, considering the man once hosted a dinner where the wine was poured from hollowed out emeralds while guests sat on chairs made of dyed goose feathers. You didn't get an invite to that one, but neither did half the Senate, so you're in good company. The records clerk is a stooped man named Lartius, who appears to be equal parts dust and disdain. He greets you with a sniff and gestures wordlessly to a stack of scrolls bound in twine and covered in what you hope is old ink. You crack the top scroll. It's titled charmingly, Feast of the Red Turnip. You almost close it right there. But curiosity is a cruel beast, and so you begin. The feast took place in the 3rd year of Tiberius's reign, deep in the belly of the Palatine Palace. It wasn't a birthday, a festival, or a military victory. No, this feast was held to celebrate a successful revision of a tax code, something only Rome would think deserves. Multiple courses and imported figs. The guest list reads like a who's who of political deadweight. Senators too cautious to stand for anything, relatives too distant to scheme effectively, and one poet whose name appears as that man who won't stop rhyming. Scholars still debate whether that was a joke or a legal designation. Cause you read on, you notice something peculiar. None of the dishes served seemed particularly appetizing. The opening course was boiled cabbage. The second, cold eel on wet bread. The third, red turnips. That's it, just turnips. No sauce, no herbs. Boiled until their souls left their bodies. It gets worse. The centerpiece of the meal, according to the notes, was a dish called suo vitorillia stew. That sounds impressive until you realize it's a mush of sacrificial leftovers. Bits of pig, sheep, and bull all boiled together in the same pot used for temple rites. Tiberius reportedly said it had a pleasingly moral flavor. There's no wine pairing, just lukewarm barley water. Someone asked for honey. The request was denied. And then dessert. Brace yourself. Fermented fig pudding with a crust made from dried carrot peels. One senator described it as a crime disguised as a pastry. Another later tried to frame the poet for bringing it. You pause reading. This isn't just forgettable, it's aggressively mediocre. And somehow you're intrigued. There's a fringe theory you remember hearing once. Historians still argue whether these intentionally uninspired feasts were a test, a loyalty check. If you flinched at the flavorless fare, Tiberius knew you craved luxury. And if you praised it too eagerly, he suspected mockery. The only safe route was to chew in silence and hope your eyebrows didn't betray you. You close the scroll and ask Lartius if there's any record of how the guests reacted. He raises an eyebrow and pulls out a different document. This one isn't a menu. It's a report written in a florid, passive-aggressive tone by one of Tiberius's aides. It details how, after the 3rd course, 7 senators attempted to excuse themselves, citing intestinal prayer time. Tiberius let them leave. 2 were dead within the month. Another was promoted. Coincidence? You'll never know. Later that day, you pass through the palace kitchens again. One cook, eyes red from onion fumes, mutters about that feast as the day flavor died. Another claims the turnips were actually white, dyed red with beet juice, because the emperor liked them angry. Somewhere nearby, a singer practices a hymn composed for the occasion. The lyrics are mostly about taxation. One line rhymes evasion with starvation. You wander past the hall where the feast was held. It's empty now, echoing, columns stretching like bored gods. The marble table still bears knife grooves from that meal. A stain in the corner looks suspiciously like fig. Pudding, standing there, you feel something odd. A sort of reverence. Not for the food, certainly, but for the absurd theater of it all. For the idea that even in the greatest empire on earth, people could be made to sit politely through something so mind-numbingly bland that it was practically art. Because maybe that's the point. Maybe the most forgettable feasts are exactly the ones we need to remember. The ones where nothing dramatic happened. where no poison was slipped, no togas were torn, and no gladiator burst. Through the wall with a pig on a spit. Just turnips. Just disappointment. You step outside into the afternoon light, squinting as the sun assaults your vision with enthusiasm you didn't ask for. Nearby, a vendor calls out, "Fresh turnips." You don't even blink. You wake up well, not entirely, but your senses stir as a sudden crack of thunder rumbles over the Palatine. Rome rarely blesses you with drama in the sky, but tonight the gods must be restless. Fitting, because today's trudge takes you to the one place in the city that practically hums with divine paranoia. The Augur's Hall. You shuffle through wet marble courtyards, sandals slipping slightly as you make your way to this sacred chamber. Of omens, where Rome's finest bird watchers, sheep liver readers, and lightning interpreters gather to ensure the empire doesn't accidentally schedule an invasion on a cursed Tuesday. And today, you're here to learn what the augurs saw in the banquets of Tiberius. Specifically, how a feast might be canceled because a raven sneezed in the wrong direction. Yes, really. You arrive at the hall, where marble statues of past augurs line the corridor. Most of them look stern. One appears to be suppressing a laugh. Inside, a gray-bearded augur named Spurius greets you without a word, motioning for you to sit. He has no scrolls, just a smooth wooden tablet and an unsettling stare. "So," he says finally, "you want to know about the feast that wasn't." Apparently, Tiberius once planned a feast to honor his dead father Augustus himself. It was meant to be a grand affair. 12 courses, 3 fountains, 1 for wine, 1 for water, and 1 inexplicably for fish sauce, and a mechanical swan. That would glide across the table, singing the emperor's praises. The swan's designer was paid in opals. You note that detail because Spurius says it twice. But then the omens began. First, a fox was seen chasing its tail in the forum. Bad sign. Then, a priest's ceremonial chicken refused to eat. Very bad sign. And on the morning of the feast, a lightning bolt struck the cookhouse chimney. Not just once, 3 times. Historians still argue whether this was divine disapproval or merely the result of poorly grounded rooftops. Tiberius, who had a famously paranoid streak, the width of the Tiber, took. No chances. He canceled the feast, ordered the opal-paid inventor to dismantle the swan, and fasted for 3 days while wearing an itchy wool tunic. Not because the gods asked him to, but because the augurs claimed wool was modestly appeasing. You? Ask Spurius if he believes the omens were real. He shrugs. Who am I to argue with a silent chicken? Then he tells you something stranger. There were whispers, even then, that Tiberius sometimes staged omens to get out of banquets he didn't want to attend. That he kept a raven in a cage, trained to squawk at the word feast. That is certain. Augur Spurius refuses to name names to be paid in imported Egyptian perfume to read entrails just pessimistically enough. You imagine Tiberius, hunched in candlelight, whispering to a hired bird and slipping coins to a priest while mumbling. Just make sure it looks like Mars is frowning. It sounds ridiculous, but this is Rome. Ridiculous is the default setting. To be fair, augury wasn't all just avian melodrama. The augurs also interpreted dreams, and Tiberius was a prolific dreamer. One of his more infamous visions involved being served a feast on a raft drifting into a whirlpool, where the courses grew smaller and smaller until they vanished entirely. You'd think that's about imperial decay or hunger for legacy. The augurs, though, they said it meant he was low on calcium. Tiberius, as reportedly drank an entire jug of goat milk the next day and postponed all political meetings until further notice. Spurius tells you one final tale before you leave. It's more legend than record, but here it is. One night, after a particularly grim omen involving a 2-headed goat, Tiberius ordered a feast served in total silence. No music, no speaking, not even the clatter of plates. Servants were instructed to place food so gently on the table that no sound was made. You raise an eyebrow. How did they eat? Spurious smiles. They didn't. They just sat there. The silence, he says, was the point. A feast as a ritual of absence. A moment not of celebration, but of listening for thunder, for divine warnings, or perhaps for the creak of fate shifting on its axis. That you leave the hall feeling oddly weightless. The sky is clearing now, and the clouds break just enough to let in a crescent moon. You pause outside and glance upward, half expecting a bird to blink at you in cryptic judgment. Instead, there's nothing but the gentle rustle of fig leaves and the wind out back at your quarters. You think about the omens you've missed in your own life. A cracked cup, a shadow where it shouldn't be, a dinner gone cold before the first bite. And you wonder, not quite seriously, if the gods were ever trying to send you a message. Or maybe, just maybe you were your own augur all along. By now, the chill of the Roman night wraps around you like a damp toga, but you press forward, drawn by the faint scent of roast meat and honey lingering on the breeze. No, it's not real, at least not tonight. It's just memory tugging at your senses as you descend toward the Subura, Rome's most crowded, chaotic neighborhood, where the banquets of the common folk thrive. Because while emperors dined in, palatial silence under the paranoid gaze of omens. The real party, the lively, unruly, wine-soaked party, was happening in the tenements and alleyways. You duck under a laundry line and step into the courtyard of a crowded insula. Here, you find an apartment no wider than a merchant's stall, but full to bursting with laughter, bodies, and the unmistakable aroma of something halfway between lamb stew and street dog. This is the people's feast. You won't find golden swans or silent chickens here. Just a chipped ceramic bowl of lentils, a slab of questionable pork, and a jug of Falernian wine that may or may not be vinegar with ambition. And yet, there's joy in it. Real joy. Tonight, you're seated between a baker named Lucius and his cousin, who swears he once saw Caligula cry. They're arguing over whether garlic or fish sauce is the more romantic seasoning. The consensus depends on who you're trying to impress and how recently they've bathed. The feast is simple but rich with ritual. Bread is torn, not cut. Wine is poured for neighbors before it's poured for yourself. And before the first bite, someone raises a crust in honor of their dead aunt, who made the best honey cakes in the block until she mistook powdered chalk for flour. There's a certain poetry in these small, imperfect moments. A feast, after all, doesn't need to be imperial to be memorable. And then comes the entertainment. A boy no older than 12 begins to recite rude poems about the emperor's bald spot, while a girl with a cracked flute plays a tune that may, or may not have once been a hymn. Someone taps rhythm on an overturned pot. And somewhere in the corner, a retired soldier teaches a one-eyed cat how to sit on command. You don't know it yet, but this exact combination of elements, bread, gossip, improvised music, and a cat that kind of gets it, is the origin of what scholars will much later call convivium plebeium, or the people's feast. Historians still argue whether these informal banquets had political overtones. Some claim they were subtle acts of resistance, a way for the poor to reclaim dignity through ritual and rhythm. Others say it was just Tuesday. There's a quirky footnote here about one such feast being interrupted by a runaway ostrich from a senator's villa. The bird allegedly knocked over 3 wine jugs, ate someone's sandal, and became a neighborhood legend known as drunk feathers. No one dared to cook it. It was considered blessed as the wine flows. The conversation turns to recipes. One elderly woman describes the perfect fig tart soft, soaked in vinegar and honey. then left to ferment in the sun for 2 days. Another insists on a street version of flamingo stew, made with chicken, beet juice, and intense imagination. You begin to realize that these banquets are not mere distractions. They're memory-making engines. While Tiberius fasted in wool and stared at bird omens, these people forged legacy from laughter and lentils. They didn't have marble columns or imported spices. What they had was each other, and that was enough. A middle-aged man across the courtyard raises his voice above the music. You know, he says, slurring slightly, they always say the gods dine in gold, but I think they sneak down here when no one's looking for the stew. It's a joke, but not a bad theory. Because if there is any sacred force at work in this city, it's not only found in temples and censers, it's right here. In the grease-stained plates passed from hand to hand, the stories shared between sips and the battered, smoky air of a feast that refuses to be quiet. Eventually, the fire pit dies down. People drift off to bed or back to work if they're on night watch. Someone cradles a sleeping child in one arm and half a leek in the other. The cat gets a scrap of meat and accepts it with regal disdain. You step outside, belly full, mind soft, and marvel at how a few bites and shared jokes can stitch together lives otherwise torn by poverty, politics, or plague. And in that quiet moment, as the city exhales under the stars, you suspect that if history has a heartbeat, it isn't echoing in the palaces or the Senate halls. It's pulsing here, beneath a broken archway, where someone just offered you the last fig. Morning has no right to arrive so quickly, yet it does, prying open your heavy eyelids with pale Roman sunlight. You shuffle past snoring laborers and thread your way through alleys still slick with the ghost of last night's wine. And as the Subura yawns and stretches, you make your way, yes, again up the Palatine Hill. Because while we've lingered with the commoners, there's still one more imperial feast you need to suffer through. And it's a doozy. Welcome to the Cena Libera, one of the few state-sponsored banquets thrown not by choice, but by tradition. These were meant to appease the public during major festivals, like Saturnalia or the Emperor's birthday. Think of it like a taxpayer-funded dinner party you didn't ask for. But hey, free figs. Tiberius didn't love these events. He saw them as necessary evils, the bread and circuses bit of his job description. But even so, he couldn't entirely shirk the duties. Rome's population, ever hungry, ever expectant, wanted food, spectacle, and maybe the occasional cascade of silver coins thrown from a balcony. Historians still argue whether Tiberius personally attended these feasts or just sent an unlucky stand-in in a well-starched toga. One fringe theory even claims he used a wax figure propped up behind a curtain, nodded occasionally by a hidden servant. Honestly, it wouldn't be the weirdest thing he did, but today, you're attending one in full spirit. You're handed a seat on a cushioned bench beside a man who introduces himself as Marcus the Slightly Employed. He immediately launches into a rant about how last year's feast served eel, but no garlic butter, and this year better not be a repeat offense. On the table before you, garum-laced everything. Fish sauce on eggs, fish sauce on fruit, fish sauce on fish. A chorus of flavors that make your eyebrows rethink their purpose. Someone sneezes, and a whole roast goat slides half off its platter. You attempt polite bites. You fail, then comes the entertainment, because no Roman feast, imperial or otherwise, is complete without it. Today's theme? Historical reenactments, which in Roman terms means shirtless gladiators pantomiming famous deaths, followed by a man reciting Virgil. Backwards while balancing on an amphora, a child dressed as Hercules attempts to wrestle a papier-matched lion. The lion wins. Everyone applauds across the courtyard. A retired actor gives a dramatic reading of Why I Hate Cilantro in full tragic meter. You're unsure whether to laugh or cry, so you settle for a hiccup dot, and of course, the real drama brews at the far end of the feast, where several senators and their wives are locked in a passive-aggressive battle over seating arrangements. It's like musical chairs, but with property rights at stake. Midway through, a servant passes by with a tray of something described as sweetbread surprise. You ask what the surprise is. He answers, "We haven't found out yet." These feasts weren't only for pleasure, they were subtle performances of empire. Tiberius knew this. Every dish was a symbol, every toast a test. The emperor's stoicism became part of the feast itself. Guests took silent cues, never laughing too loudly, never drinking too quickly. Not unless they wanted to end up on a blacklist or, worse, reassigned to the mines. And still, some rebelled. In their own quiet ways. One poet, seated across from you, writes mocking verses on a napkin using diluted wine and proceeds to slip them under bread rolls for others to find. The verses are terrible, but the effort? Sublime. You hear rumors that at one of these dinners, a guest stood up mid-toast and belched, "Long live Caligula." By mistake. He was never seen again. Some say he joined a monastery. Others say he is the monastery. But not all these feasts ended in scandal. Some ended in love stories, or at least intolerable conversations about which cheese causes the least. Regret. You're deep into one of these debates, now comparing notes on sheep's milk versus goat, when suddenly the musicians return. Lutes, lyres, a curious pipe instrument that sounds like a goose with dreams. It's all back. The music swells, and once again, wine begins to pour like loyalty from a desperate client. And for a moment brief, fleeting, but real, you feel it. A kind of peace. The feast becomes a dreamscape, the blurred edges of a civilization feasting. Not just on food, but on the belief that order, pageantry, and mildly competent kitchen staff could hold back the chaos of the world outside. Historians still argue whether these spectacles were genuine expressions of public joy or cleverly disguised propaganda. But to you, lying back against the cushions, watching a man juggle olives with his elbows, the answer doesn't matter dot, because in that hour, your belly is full, the music is soft, and Rome-mad, glorious overcooked Rome feels strangely like home dot. As the feast winds down, slaves sweep away half-eaten platters and dripping jugs. Guests murmur parting quips and stagger into the night. And the man beside you, Marcus the slightly employed, hands you a half-finished fig tart with a wink. "Tell your grandchildren," he says, "you saw the emperor's feast and lived." You nod, lips sticky with honey and fish sauce. And as you descend from the Palatine, moonlight trailing behind you like a frayed toga, you carry with you not just the taste of imperial indulgence, but its contradictions, the wealth, the theater, the very Roman hope that tomorrow could always be. Fed, distracted, and entertained into compliance. Your sandals crunch softly on gravel as you leave the glowing embers of the imperial feast behind. Dawn has fully cracked the Roman sky open now, but instead of heading to sleep like any sensible person might after enduring 12 hours of public pageantry and oversalted anchovies, you find yourself turning toward the Tiber, because Tiberius didn't just host grand feasts. He was also famous or infamous for his private dining preferences. And tonight, or rather, this very early morning, you're about to slip behind the curtain of imperial privacy into the secret suppers of a man whose idea of relaxing involved rules, shadows, and extremely awkward silences. Welcome to Villa Hobis, the emperor's hideaway on the island of Capri. You're not actually there. Of course, you're still in Rome, but your imagination is doing the heavy lifting now, lulled by too much wine and too many fish guts. You picture yourself boarding a small, creaky boat, your guide a disgruntled sailor who mumbles about taxes, storm clouds, and the emperor's taste in statues. Villa Hobis looms above the sea, like a stone throne. It's perched high, remote, and designed to impress and intimidate. You climb the twisting paths, your legs wobbling like overcooked lentils. And when you finally reach the top, you find the door already open. Because in your mind's version of Capri, even the most paranoid, Emperor leaves the door ajar for a curious dreamer like you. Inside, the mood is vastly different from the city's lavish feasts. Here, dining is quiet, intimate, controlled. You enter a room lit only by oil lamps. Long shadows crawl along the mosaic floor. The table is small, meant for one or two at most, and set with meticulous precision. Every cup is the same distance from the edge. Every plate is rotated just so. There's no music here, only the rhythmic drip of a nearby fountain and the occasional chirp of a bird who clearly missed their migration. Historians still argue whether these private suppers were reflective of Tiberius's true nature or just further performances for an audience of none. Some say he dined with philosophers. Others claim he preferred total solitude, whispering to statues or scribbling notes to himself between bites of boiled cabbage. Tonight, he's not alone. He's invited you, for reasons unclear. Maybe he's feeling generous. Maybe he's just curious how long you'll last before cracking a joke about fish sauce again. You sit, heart pounding with that curious mix of dread and boredom only imperial. Rome can truly deliver. The meal begins. Course 1, cold lentils with cumin. Silent chewing. Course 2, a thin barley soup. Still no speaking. Course 3, a roasted thrush, so tiny it feels like biting into a crunchy secret. At last, Tiberius speaks. His voice is quiet, raspy like parchment, dragged across sand. Do you? No, he says. The punishment for laughing during this course? You freeze, spoon halfway to your mouth. He doesn't smile. Then, slowly, he does. The smallest twitch at the corner of his mouth. A smirk, almost imperceptible. He's joking. Maybe. This was the Tiberius's inner circle knew dry, deadpan, a little terrifying, and completely unreadable. One senator once claimed that eating with him was like sharing a bed with a wolf who occasionally quoted Cicero. But even wolves grow weary. He leans back, eyes distant now. You get the sense that food isn't really the point of this dinner. It's ritual, a way to fill the silence between one difficult day and the next. A philosopher might call it a meditation. A gossip might call it a test. There are no dancers here. No jugglers, no honey-glazed dormice. Just a man and his memories, chewing slowly through both. The servant brings the final course, plain bread, dipped in olive oil. Tiberius takes a bite, then offers you the rest. You accept. It's tasteless, but heavy. Like the room. Like the weight of Empire. And somewhere, outside these walls, Rome continues its raucous churn. Senators jostle, chariots roll, bakeries rise with the sun. But here, in this hushed villa of the mind, time pauses. The emperor eats. You eat. The world waits. One quirky bit of trivia floats to mind. Some ancient sources insist that Tiberius, during his later years, insisted on watching ancient comedies while dining, but only the parts with characters falling into fountains or getting slapped with loaves of bread. Sophisticated humor, he called it. You're tempted to bring this up, but maybe not yet. The lamp sputters. The wind shifts. Do you think Rome will remember me? He asks. It's not clear whether he means you specifically or anyone at all. You nod anyway. Yes, you say, but probably for the wrong things. He laughs quietly. I thought so. And just like that, the dinner ends. You stand, bow slightly, and step back into the night. The air is cool. The stars, finally visible. Above the rooftops of your mind, scatter like breadcrumbs leading you back to your bed. The emperor watches you go. Maybe he always does. Your steps retrace themselves now, leaving behind the flickering shadows of Villa Hobbies and stepping back onto firmer, if still metaphorical ground. You shake off the weight of imperial gloom, only to tumble straight into a very different sort of Roman food culture, one that doesn't involve emperors or paranoia, one that doesn't require invitations carved into ivory or tables set like chessboards. No, this time, you're going underground. Literally. Welcome to the Popina. You slide open a creaky wooden door in your imagination and duck into the low, smoke-tinged room. This is the Roman tavern, not the kind where senators debate or generals toast victories, but where the common, dusty, exhausted you of ancient Rome would likely end up after a long day of hauling bricks, grinding grain, or being generally underpaid. The first thing you notice is the smell. Wine, vinegar, garlic, sweat, and something that may have once been meat. It's not unpleasant exactly, but it definitely wakes you up. This place is packed. Men in tunics, women with dyed hair, even a few former slaves with shiny new togas bought on credit. Everyone's crammed elbow to elbow around grimy counters and low stools, laughing too loud and gesturing with bowls in their hands. There's a jug of vinum being passed around that tastes like spiced regret, and someone is definitely cheating at dice in the corner. You sit. The tavern keeper, or capo, slides over, sizing you up. He offers a menu that includes exactly 3 things: lentils, bread with fish paste, and mystery stew. You pick the stew. You live dangerously, and that's what the Popina was, a place of risk, relief, and release. Historians still argue whether these places were genuinely popular among all classes, or mostly just the haunt of Rome's underbelly. What they agree on, though, is that the Popina was a pressure valve, somewhere to eat, drink, gamble, argue, and pretend just for a few hours that you weren't at the bottom of the Roman ladder. Your stew arrives. It's lukewarm, but filled with enough beans and barley to put something in your stomach. There's also a chunk of something you choose not to identify. You chew slowly, pretending not to notice the cat stalking the floorboards beneath your bench. 2 men nearby are arguing about chariot racing. Blue versus green, the eternal sports rivalry of the Roman circus. You're tempted to chime in, but then you remember you've already been warned about the punishment for laughing during stew courses. You sip your wine instead. One particularly bored patron pulls out a set of knuckle bones, Rome's answer to dice, and invites you to play. You accept, mostly to avoid eye contact with the rat, now emerging from under the wine jug. The game is simple. Throw the bones, guess the score, curse when you lose. Within minutes, you've lost a theoretical denarius and gained 3 new theoretical enemies. There's music, of a sort. A boy with a flute tries to play something that might once have been a tune, but mostly sounds like a goat being gently scolded. Still, the crowd claps along. A woman gets up to dance, wobbling slightly with every step, and everyone cheers like she's just conquered Gaul. And here, in this sticky, smoky room, you feel something you didn't expect: comfort. Because this is Rome too. Not the Rome of marble forums and silk-draped couches, but of cracked clay bowls and jokes about bad fish. This is where people laughed loudest, ate quickest, and forgot most completely. One quirky inscription from an excavated tavern wall comes to mind, scrawled in crude Latin: "I paid for wine and was tricked with vinegar. Never trust a man with clean sandals." You wonder who wrote that? A legionary? A baker? Someone like you? The lights flicker, lamps running low. You hear a fight. Start in the back room. It sounds like someone insulted someone else's mother's garum recipe. You wisely decide now is a good time to leave. Back on the imaginary street, the air feels lighter, cleaner. The moon hangs low over the Subura, Rome's densest, liveliest, loudest district. Someone singing a song about goats and lost love. You don't understand the lyrics, but the tune lingers in your mind like the taste of that stew. You pass a sleeping beggar wrapped in an old cloak. You tuck an imaginary coin into his hand. You pass a stray dog. He follows you for 2 blocks, then decides you're not worth the effort. There's a strange peace in this moment. After all the grandiosity of emperors and senators, all the feasts, designed to impress or intimidate, it's this quiet, greasy, deeply human night that sticks with you. Because the Popina wasn't about spectacle. It was about survival. And maybe, just maybe, a little joy, not your stomach gurgles. Not ominously, just tiredly. You walk on dot, and behind you, the tavern hums into the night, welcoming the next hungry soul. You wander now into the sunlight again, or at least the soft, sleepy haze of it. It exists only in the dimmest corners of your mind. The street beneath your feet has changed. The buildings are brighter, the marble more polished, and the sandals cleaner. Your journey has brought you, finally, to a place where appetite meets ambition at the highest level. The domus of a Roman senator. Today's feast, a triumph in everything but name. You've been invited. Don't ask how into one of the most exclusive gatherings in all of Rome. A private banquet honoring the return of a victorious general. It's the kind of event where even the grapes arrive with better pedigree than some patricians. You step through the massive wooden doors and are immediately struck by the smell of luxury. Not just food, though that's certainly part of it. Rich roasts, honeyed pastries, spiced sauces, but also perfumes, fresh garlands, and polished silver. Everything sparkles. Even the guests. You're ushered into the triclinium, the dining room, where 3 couches form a horseshoe around a central table, laden with enough food to feed a small province. You take your place among the others, reclining awkwardly like someone trying to blend into a painting. The senator makes his entrance to light applause and loud compliments. He smiles, more out of habit than warmth. His toga has been starched within an inch of its life. You suspect his teeth have been too. Now the performance begins. This isn't eating. It's choreography. Slaves enter in a steady parade, bearing trays of delicacies you can barely name, let alone spell. First up, dormice stuffed with pork and pine nuts. Yes, actual dormice. You pretend not to be fazed. Next, eggs poached in saffron and wine, followed by roasted peacock, served with feathers reattached for dramatic flair. And here, deep in this opulence, the contradictions of Rome curl like steam from a hot dish. Historians still argue whether these lavish meals were about genuine indulgence or calculated theater. Was this about satisfying hunger or status? Likely both. But to you, now reclining with a gold-trimmed goblet in hand, it feels like a different sort of hunger is being fed. Not in the belly, in the ego. A senator next to you begins recounting a war story in which he personally defeated at least 50 barbarians with nothing but a spear and the glint in his eye. Across the room, a poet tries to recite verses over the squawk of a live flamingo. Yes, live being carried in as a table centerpiece. Someone makes a joke about Nero's beard oil. You laugh politely. A man 2 cushions down tries to impress a courtesan with his knowledge of Stoic philosophy. She replies with an epigram that sends him into quiet reflection and probably existential crisis. You sip your wine, which tastes like plums and mild arrogance. A tray arrives bearing snails, marinated in milk and seasoned with mint. You glance around. Everyone is chewing slowly, like philosophers mulling the nature of reality. You join them. Then the entertainment begins. A mime performs a sketch mocking the senator's political rival. Laughter rolls through the room, edged with danger. Satire in Rome is delicious, but potentially fatal. You chuckle just enough to blend in. There's a troupe of dancers next. One slips. No one acknowledges it, then dash a lion. Yes, a real lion. Not for combat, just for ambience. It pads around the edges of the room, chained, bored, and slightly drooling. You hope it's well-fed by now. The feast has sprawled into the 7th course. You've lost track of what you've eaten, but you're sure one of the jellied items blinked at you. You're also fairly sure the senator hasn't touched a single dish, content to bask in the orbit of his own importance. That's the thing about these banquets. They weren't just for guests. They were for reputation. One quirky account tells of a nobleman who, upon realizing his rival had served flamingo tongues, responded by hosting a dinner featuring only dishes that had never touched the ground. The result? Suspended meats, fruit hanging from ceilings, and wine poured directly into mouths from foot-high pitchers. A logistical nightmare. A social triumph. You recline further, trying to digest both. The food and the absurdity. The final course arrives dessert. Honey cakes molded into the shapes of gods. You bite into Jupiter. He tastes like almonds and irony. Someone passes around a small scroll with riddles. You solve one and earn polite nods. Another guest solves two and earns a standing ovation. A lion growls softly. Coincidence? The room grows heavier as dusk creeps in. Guests begin to leave, gliding out with exaggerated farewells and promises of future favors. You rise full of borrowed elegance and follow them into the evening air. Outside, the real Rome still hums. Vendors shout, children chase dogs. The smell of fish sauce clings to the breeze. And yet, for all the gold and glory of the feast, you feel oddly hollow. Not unhappy, just distant. Like you've been playing dress-up in someone else's world. Because while the senator's table is laden with delicacies, it's the laughter from a popina you remember most. Still, you pocket a honey cake. For research. Your feet return to stone streets still warm from the sun's memory. But Rome never sleeps. Not entirely. Even as her shadows lengthen and her marble cools, the heart of the empire pulses on. So you follow it tonight. You're no longer a guest of the elite or a bystander in some philosophical death party. Tonight, you are simply curious. And Rome rewards curiosity. If not with comfort, then at least with stories. You walk until the buildings thin and the air changes. There's laughter ahead, but not the brittle kind that fills banquet halls or senatorial plots. This laughter is throaty, unrefined, and real. You've arrived at a popina, a tavern, not the kind with gilded cups or peacock meat, but a narrow, smoky, shoulder-to-shoulder slice of Roman life. It smells of spilled wine, grilled garlic sausages, and ambition long since surrendered. You hesitate, then duck under the cracked archway and into the glow of a single oil lamp. Immediately, eyes swivel, but no one asks your name. No one demands your lineage. Here, nobody cares who your father was, as long as you're not a thief or a tax collector. You squeeze onto a bench between a man with a broken nose and a woman who might have once stabbed a lover, possibly recently. She offers you olives. You accept the tavern keeper, a woman with arms like Emperor slides a cup your way. It's wine, technically, mostly vinegar with the ghost of a grape. You drink it like a local, without wincing. A game erupts at the next table, ludus latrunculorum. The Roman version of chess, except faster, meaner, and with the occasional dagger drawn. Coins clink. Accusations fly. The broken-nosed man leans over and whispers the trick is always to control the center. You nod, as if you knew that someone sings badly, others join, and worse. But the music is joyful, even if off-key. A melody older than any temple. A rhythm that belongs not to senators, but to smiths, slaves, sailors. You find yourself humming, then singing. A woman dances. A man collapses. No one checks if he's dead, just lets him sleep beneath the table until dawn. This, you realize, is the true feast of Rome. Not dormice or peacocks, not mimes or lion cameos. No silver platters, no philosophical debates. Just bread, noise, and warmth. A room full of strangers choosing to be less alone. A man tells you he once sailed with Caesar. Another claims he is Caesar. You believe the first. Someone offers to read. Your fortune in the wine dregs. You decline. Not because you don't believe in omens, but because tonight you don't want to know. You're already exactly where you need to be. At some point, someone starts juggling sausages. It goes poorly. You duck. Laughter roars louder than any applause ever heard in the Senate. You're handed a fig stuffed with goat cheese. It's the best thing you've eaten all day. And for the first time, surrounded by broken Latin and wine-stained tunics, you feel full. Not just your stomach, your soul too. Rome may be a city of emperors and oracles, but it's also this. It's here. This sweaty, smoky, song-soaked room. And when you finally stagger out into the night, feet unsteady, the stars seem to nod in approval. You've seen the marble and the madness. You've walked through temples and tombs. But only now do you feel Rome truly, deeply alive. You lean on a column. Burp softly, then smile. You shuffle forward again, the weight of 100 courses trailing behind you like a heavy cloak. Rome's feasts have been many things: gruesome, lavish, absurdly competitive. But now, as the night settles, you drift into a gathering far more intimate. This is not the domain of senators or emperors, but of philosophers, exiles, and eccentric millionaires with nothing left to prove. Tonight, you find yourself in a villa on the Bay of Naples, perched above the dark sea. The host is a man named Gaius Petronius Arbiter. Yes, that Petronius, the so-called arbiter of elegance under Nero. He's been dismissed from court, stripped of influence, and rumor has it he knows exactly when and how he'll die. For now, he's very much alive and throwing a farewell dinner for the ages. There's a strange electricity in the air, part melancholy, part mischief. The guests are hand-picked. Poets, musicians, faded nobles, a few retired gladiators, and one woman dressed entirely in peacock feathers. You take a seat. No one asks who you are. That's how you know it's going to be a good night. The triclinium is candlelit and draped in silks. Musicians pluck at lyres, while wine flows like regret. But unlike the senator's banquet, this meal isn't about posturing. It's about indulgence in the face of the end. A platter arrives bearing fried thrushes arranged into the shape of a ship. The symbolism is not subtle. Petronius raises a toast not to Caesar, not to Rome, but to the dignity of absurdity. You clink cups. Your wine tastes like figs and final chances. A historian would tell you this is likely fiction, that the infamous Scena Trimalchionis in the Satiricon is a satire, not an account. Historians still argue whether Petronius was mocking the nouveau, rich or simply holding a mirror to all Roman excess. But here, reclining beside a poet who's carving haikus into his cheese, it doesn't matter. The line between reality and performance has blurred beyond repair. A dish of sea urchin custard arrives. You try it. It's philosophical. Someone reads an elegy to a goat they once loved. Another performs a silent dance meant to embody the emotion of moderate disappointment. It's oddly moving. Petronius himself is remarkably calm. You ask him how he can host such a decadent gathering with so much finality in the air. He replies, because a man should choose his ending as carefully as his beginning. You nod, as if you've always believed that. Another guest, a stoic named Marcus disagrees. He insists one must accept endings as fate, not fashion. They debate gently over honeyed almonds. Neither wins. That, you realize, is the point. As the evening deepens, the dishes become stranger. Pork shaped like fish. Fish stuffed with fruit. Fruit filled with tiny songbirds that flutter free when bitten. A culinary magic trick that earns applause. Somewhere, a small fire breaks out on a cushion and is quietly extinguished with wine. Petronius stands again. He says this will be his last toast to the moments that never mattered, but stayed with us anyway. The room falls silent. Even the liars pause. And then, with a smirk, he adds, also, to the man who mistook a wax fig for a real one and dislocated his jaw. That was hilarious. Laughter returns, but it's softer now. More nostalgic. The wind shifts. You catch the Z. Scent of salt, rosemary, and the strange, lingering smoke of civilization near its tipping point. Someone plays a haunting melody on the flute. You close your eyes. Behind your eyelids, Rome stretches and crumbles at once. Golden statues topple. Vine-covered ruins whisper your name. One guest is asleep. Another is gently crying into her lentils. A third is sketching the entire evening in charcoal on the wall. The lion from the senator's banquet, probably not the same one, but who knows, appears in a dreamlike flash before vanishing behind a curtain. And then, like all Roman evenings, the feast winds down, not with a bang but a sigh. You rise slowly. Petronius nods in farewell, as if you've shared something wordless and sacred. Perhaps you have. You step outside. The moon over the Bay of Naples is blinding. The sea breathes in and out, as rhythmic as a lullaby. Somewhere down the hill, fishermen prepare for morning. Life continues, in spite of everything. You take a final look at the villa. You don't know whether the events of this night were fact, fiction, or an opium-soaked blend of both. But you know this. It meant something. And maybe that's all any feast can offer in the end. You head back toward the road, full of strange dishes, stranger company, and the bittersweet realization that nothing this delicious ever truly lasts.